Welcome to the Block and Tackle Show, hosted by Carl Block. Carl is a partner in the law firm of Loeb & Loeb here in Los Angeles, California. He will be tackling some of the biggest issues in business today. Listen, learn, and enjoy as he leaves no stone unturned during deep conversations with some of today's most amazing business leaders. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to today's version of the Block and Tackle Show. Today, I am very pleased to have a special guest, the City Attorney of Los Angeles, Hydee Feldstein. Hydee is a very dynamic, energetic person who has had a long background in the private sector as a corporate attorney working on very high level and sophisticated things. And she ran for city attorney, after having a long and distinguished legal career. And so we're very, very happy to have her today. And I think you're going to enjoy hearing her. Low key, I've seen some of the other things she's done on TV, and she's amazing. So I'm really excited to have her. Hydee, thank you for coming.
Carl, thank you so much for having me. And I noticed you say that I had a long and distinguished career. Let's not discuss how long you and I have known each other, but it's been a very long time.
We'll say 10 years. How's that?
That would be a lot, but
okay. So listen, your story about running, okay? You weren't a politico. You had no public office. To my knowledge, you weren't anybody's chief of staff. You weren't, on the DNC or anything like that. And I remember hearing about when you were running, and I knew from some people in my office, there were people who had national endorsements for this seat and national fundraising. And these are people with long time experience in politics. And basically, you were a neophyte. It's so courageous. Like, how did you decide to do this? And why did you think you could win?
I wouldn't have entered the field had there been somebody with significant local name recognition. There were a couple of candidates who held elected office at the city who I had heard might run. And if they had run, I never would have entered the race. I didn't have any prior political experience at all. I mean, I'd never worked for a politician. I'd never really run for office. I had served as an area representative on my local neighborhood council for a few years. And that was, from about 2016 to 2020. But I had no experience at City Hall in Sacramento or in DC. I ran for a few reasons. One is this office needed a lawyer who actually wanted to run the office and practice law, as opposed to having someone hold the seat warm while they decided what else they wanted to run for. I've lived in LA since 1982. And to me, a lot of what was wrong with the city was that we haven't had a city attorney who wanted to do that job. Okay. Because the job of city attorney is not to make policy. It's not to make big pronouncements. You don't see me on a lot of press. My job is to take the policies and make things work better in the city as a whole and enforce. And those are things that as a lawyer, I'm perfectly comfortable doing. Having lived here as long as I did, having looked at my father who passed away in 2020, 2 months shy of his 98th birthday, and my mother, who's, bless her, going to turn 94 this month and is living with me. I sort of thought, okay, I have a third of my life left ahead of me. I don't like where the city is. The city is a bit of a shambles, and I can either try to do something about it, or I can do what so many of my friends were thinking about doing, and some actually did, which is move out. And I didn't want to do that. So I leaned in. I figured the worst thing that would happen is I wouldn't get elected.
Well, obviously the worst didn't come to pass. And I still think when people have national endorsements, maybe even somebody had the endorsement of a former president, and you're brand new. And again, this was not a 5-10 year thing in the making from my guesstimation. You hadn't been lining up fundraisers 4 or 5 years ago, or I mean, it's just very courageous, and it's a great story.
The only thing I did to prepare is I had a very bad divorce. And so I called my ex-husband and I said, look, I'm not reliving this mess. Okay. Either you're with me or you're not, but it matters to me. And he endorsed me and contributed the maximum, and he said he couldn't think of anybody better to be a city attorney.
That's
So,
pretty high praise, Heidi.
yeah,
So when you were thinking about doing this and what kind of job you could do, since you had an experience in the private sector, and as we sort of talked about, people who were thinking about running were longtime politicos. How do you think it helped prepare you for the job, given that you had been working with lots of high-powered business clients in the city?
there's a part of it that prepared me very well, and there's a part of it that I've had to unlearn. So, and I didn't know that when I ran.
Okay, tell me.
The part that I think went very well was I'm very used to managing large, complicated messes. And large groups of lawyers, and managing lawyers is a little bit like herding cats. So whether it's the deal experience that I had, where you have to manage some multidisciplinary teams and drive a deal to conclusion, or whether it was the positions of leadership that I had in the law firms where I was a partner, I think that piece of it was incredibly important. I was blessed pretty early on in my career with clients who also believed that outside counsel were part of their management team. And so I had a fair amount of training, and that all worked out great. The part of it that I wasn't prepared for is number one, I didn't know how big a job it was, Carl, and it's huge. And it is far and away the biggest job, not only that I've ever had, but that I've ever seen. Now, I haven't seen the job of the Attorney General or the Solicitor General, but government work and the complexity and the variety of the issues that come before you, all under the rubric of municipal law, are just astounding. The second thing that I didn't foresee is I have 5 unions. My office is a closed shop. So everybody in my office is a unionized employee, and dealing with lawyers who are both in, it's not civil service, but it's an equivalent, a tenured unionized position, and have a different approach to private practice, and your ability to lead, to incentivize people is much more limited in this role than it is in private practice. In private practice, you can award bonuses, you can give promotions, you can give demotions. I mean, there are ways to incentivize people financially to do the work that you want them to do and to reward really good, outstanding work. It's a little bit different in government. There aren't those tools. And so you have to learn to lead by example and moral suasion, and hopefully cajole and persuade.
I'm very confident you are the right person for the job, and if anybody could do it, you could do it. So let's turn to what it's been like since you've been there. And in particular, you had a bunch of accomplishments last year. What do you want to tell me about of all the accomplishments that you've done, and what was the hardest to do?
My first year I would call inward facing.
Okay.
I think I was the first city attorney, at least in many years, to come into the office and not bring a team with me from the outside. I had made a campaign promise that I would try to promote from within where possible. And I've by and large kept that promise. The current structure of my executive team, there's 3 lawyers with, well, there's more than that. Most of the lawyers have many, many, many decades of experience in the office. I brought in a new chief of the real estate branch. And I brought in, as I suspect you know, one of my former opponents in my race, to really help me with the governmental relations and the city hall piece of it. So as I looked at the office, I focused on a few different areas. One was, how could I structure the office so as to reduce the avenues of corruption into City Hall or even into my office if it came to that? And so I focused primarily on 2 areas that have been controversial. The first is real estate. Most of the news on our elected officials come out of the real estate arena, whether it's building and safety, whether it's planning and land use, whether it's, approval of projects. those are areas that I focused on. And so I formed a new real estate branch. And I brought in someone who's been a real estate lawyer, an affordable housing developer, and a property manager to run the branch. And he came in from the outside. The other thing that I did was I took a look at the way the criminal branch was being run. Um, and I had a number of issues that, because of the ethical wall that the office has historically had that separates criminal and civil, things in the criminal branch had sort of been running on their own and hadn't necessarily kept abreast of changes in the rules of professional conduct or kept abreast of
Mm.
21st century public law firm practices. And so I reorganized the criminal branch. I've spent the year putting together my team, restructuring the office, making sure that we have a contracting and procurement division within municipal law to help businesses and to cut back our RFP forms from 25 pages to 5. I've got a tenants' rights small group focused on we put out an awful lot of information in pamphlets in 7 languages over the Just Cause ordinance that was passed by council last year. I've got a new workers' rights division in municipal law that was really focused on a lot of the labor union work and a lot of the wage theft that has gone on in our city. And I'm very proud of the fact that we have turned around a lot of the attitude in civil litigation. I will tell you a story without a name. There are a number of lawyers who like to sue the city repeatedly. I call them our frequent flyers. And I ran into one at an event who said to me, "Oh, Heidi, you should just sit down with me and settle all my cases now, because I've sued the city 20 times and I've won 17 of them." And I laughed and I sort of said, "Yeah, well, of the 3 you lost, 2 were within the last 10 months since I took office. So get ready for a lot more of those." And so I'm working very hard to address some of the misconceptions of our city. I am incredibly proud of the talent that the office has, of the hardworking, dedicated public servants who are in the office, of the great lawyering that takes place. And if we can marshal our resources and break down the silos that historically have separated the branches, I think we'll be operating going forward in a much better way.
So look at you, you were a disruptor. You came in and did all that.
You
Um,
never would have thought that of me, right, Carl? You
y-
never would have thought I was a disruptor.
you know something, all I'm gonna say is nothing would surprise me. And it's not like you're a shrinking violet, as we all know.
Mm.
So, so,
Let me
I know,
also talk about some of my outward facing initiatives.
sure, please.
I don't know how much you've heard about what I call Project Figueroa Street or the Figueroa Street Initiative.
Yes, and that is actually was on my list, so let's talk about that.
Well, I came into office and on the campaign trail, and by the way, I met tens of thousands of people on the campaign trail. You want to know how I won? I won through volunteers. I won through hard work. I won through the endorsements of the 4 major newspapers in town. I mean, I really,
You earned it.
I put in a lot of work. But one of the things that I did was I started learning about parts of the city that I really didn't know. And there's a detective, I believe in the Northeast Division of the Los Angeles Police Department, Detective Mike Ventura, who took me on a ride along to Figueroa Street. And I don't know if you've ever been to Figueroa Street after dark. It used to be even in broad daylight. But it was a center of illegal activity that wouldn't last for 2 seconds on San Vicente Boulevard, either in Brentwood or in Mid-City. Okay, it just wouldn't happen. Um, and as I looked at the age of because it was mostly women and girls,
The girls, yeah.
it, they were really young. And I started hearing stories about the minors who were being literally trafficked up and down the corridor, and how many of them came from our own foster care and dependency care system. After I took office, council member Marquise Harris Dawson and Mayor Bass pulled me aside and said, "This has been a problem more than 40 years in the making. Can you do anything about it? Can you put something together to start trying to help this community?" And so I reached out and we formed a multi-agency, multidisciplinary task force to really start cracking down on the illegal activity. So the U.S. Attorney's Office, specifically Martina Estrada, who's the head of that office, and Jeff Chemerinsky, who was in the office at the time, he's now running for DA, from the U.S. Attorney's Office really came in to help, because the trick is I don't have felony jurisdiction. So I can catch all the human traffickers in the world. I can't do anything with them except, bring them to a misdemeanor trial. The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, the two major federal agencies involved in this work, partnered with our LAPD, specifically the 77th Street Station,
Mhm.
to start trying to address the problem as a whole. What my office did, my office went after a lot of the centers of illegal activity, the motels that were not in compliance and that were serving as just open brazen places for prostitution, for drug dealing, for guns, for violence, for danger to the neighborhoods. We have at this point gotten orders of closure on 2 motels, and we have 7 others in active negotiations and compliance. My office also worked with the LAPD to send out Dear John letters, which is basically we put up surveillance cameras along the Figueroa Street corridor and we take pictures of your car. And we send a letter to the registered owner of the vehicle. Dear registered owner, your car has been seen in an area that involves human trafficking of minors. Please be more careful. The registered owner is frequently the spouse. And we enclose with a picture of the car, usually the individual John with the trafficked minor. So that created a little bit of consternation. We arrested and cited dozens and dozens of Johns, and we actually have arrested and referred, I believe it was a dozen cases to the U.S. Attorney's Office for further investigation to put together cases and prosecution. Stay tuned. I spoke to U.S. Attorney Martina Estrada this morning. And I think that we are going to be making some pretty exciting announcements within the month. The piece of it I'm most proud of is how many women and girls have accepted our offer for services to come off the street, to go into shelters, to go into housing, to go into rehab, and to start on a path toward the training and employment opportunities that they need to stand on their own without going back to their pimps on the street. I think last count, there were more than 33 minors and a total of 60 women and girls who we had managed to assist in getting off of the life of street walking along the Figueroa Quarter.
Honey, that's an amazing story. And quite frankly, until I had done the research about what you had done, I didn't know how bad the Figueroa issue was. And the fact that people came to you from the city council and said it's been 40 years. And it's just, from what I could see, wasn't significantly in the media. There wasn't this uprising of concerned citizens. And I mean, it's amazing that you were able to turn that around and help make a difference right now. And I assume now that the word is out and now that you've done all this, that you're going to start getting to the point where there aren't going to be so many arrests because people aren't going to be there anymore. And so, I mean, it's brilliant. It's really brilliant. And, again, you're a doer. You did it.
We did it, Carl, because
Sure.
everybody pitched in and did their part. I mean, the council member got the funding from his discretionary funds for the cameras that we needed for the surveillance.
Uh-huh.
Mayor Bass and I went on a ride along, I want to say 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago at 11 o'clock at night. And whereas a year ago, that corridor was jammed with dozens or hundreds of streetwalkers. When we went recently, there were some pockets, there were some corners, but the girls were in groups of 2, 3, and 5, not in groups of 3 dozen. And there were just a few corners that were still a problem. We'll continue to work on it. And part of the effort is to provide a path out. So I'm talking to labor unions about the possibility of bringing apprenticeship programs to bear as these young women get ready for a different life.
Okay, and we're gonna talk more about apprenticeship in a little bit, but that's brilliant. It's just brilliant. So that's a great story. So I know a couple of the other things that caught my eye. One was something that most people wouldn't think about either, which is copper wire theft. I don't think most people have any idea about how much it would cost the city because people were just stealing copper wire. And was it a city council person who brought it to your attention, or how did it get your focus?
Council President Paul Krikorian came up with the idea. Council President Paul Krikorian brought the resources to bear. He had a press conference last November. And it was actually his initiative and his good efforts that brought us all together. What we got asked was, how can we attack this problem? Because what happens is our streetlights, if you look sometimes at the bottom of the box, the cement is broken and someone's reached in and pulled out the copper wire and they sell it. Okay, they sell it for a few bucks. That wire might cost us, $5 grand to replace, but they sell it on the street for 10, 20, 30, 50 bucks most. And so when we go back and fix it, they break again and again, and they take out the wire again. And we were spending literally millions of dollars a year replacing copper wire. The theft of copper wire makes our neighborhoods, as Council President Krikorian put it, darker and less safe. And so the job of my office was, how do we attack this at scale? Because picking up some poor soul who's unhoused and who's stealing a little bit of copper wire for 50 bucks is not effective at making an enormous impact.
Sure.
You may or may not know this. Copper wire gets sold to metal recyclers and to licensed brokers in the sale of metals. There's rules. Each person who runs one of these authorized licensed shops has to register with the LAPD, has to send in dailies as to what they bought, and cannot pay the seller for 3 days. Registry is only good as enforcement.
Understood.
So my office, my public rights branch under the auspices of Kate Kennelly, who's just been fabulous. She was the chief of staff and chief deputy when I took office, and she's now running public rights. They got together and we sent out 661 letters to these copper wire resellers, if you will, and subpoenaing their records and making sure that they were keeping their registries. We've partnered with the LAPD. Most recently, a couple of council members have gotten together and made a motion and made some money available for overtime for officers to keep doing the registry. And as we shut down the demand, as the resellers get a little more careful about who they buy from, I expect the theft to go down dramatically.
That makes sense. By the way, just out of my curiosity, if they sell it to a reseller for like $5, how much does the reseller get when I mean, I don't even understand how the market exists for this.
It gets bundled to be melted down and
Okay.
formed into a new copper wire that then we rebuy for $5,000. Just saying, it's
No,
it's
it's
the gift that
crazy,
keeps on giving.
but it just doesn't seem like such a big revenue play that they, that they would be motivated to do this. And obviously, given that their cost benefit analysis is now changing, hopefully it'll shut down.
Well, it's a little bit like retail theft, right?
Mhm.
You can catch the guys who do the smash and grab. I say guys, the people who do
Sure.
the smash and grab. I'll give you one example. The LAPD did a fabulous job at tracking down a bunch of the individuals who had done a smash and grab, I think at the Galleria
Okay.
alley. Of the 9 individuals arrested, 3 or 4 were minors.
Hmm.
Okay, that means I have no jurisdiction. Those
Okay.
automatically go to the DA because my only jurisdiction is over adults who commit misdemeanors in the
Yes.
city of LA. Of the remainder, I believe all but 2 or 3 had already been adjudged incompetent to stand trial. I don't mean to use a technical legal term, IST, but once a court finds that you're so far removed from reality that you are incapable of assisting in your own defense, we can't even try you.
I understand.
Okay. And so out of these, 9 poor souls who were really just doing the smash and grab to go take the goods someplace else, there were maybe 2 that we could have prosecuted for misdemeanors and it's petty theft. And even if we go ahead and charge them in court, the courts will often divert for petty theft. And so what
Understood.
we're trying to do is, again, as we did with copper wire, find a way to stop the retail theft at scale, moving
No,
up.
I hear you, and it was interesting when I saw what you were doing. There were two very clever things that I had never heard about a city attorney doing. One, stacking the misdemeanors so that if somebody committed multiple counts of misdemeanors, that you would ask for consecutive sentences in misdemeanors, which again, that's a pretty clever thing to do. And secondly, going after the people who are causing these young kids to do the smash and grab. So, I mean, I know in certain other locations they've thought of that, but in toto, in the combination of the things that you've done, again, you're a disruptor, you're an innovator, you're creative.
I want to give a shout out to 3 women in my criminal branch who prosecute sexual abuse against children.
Okay.
Okay. Jennifer Waxler, Heidi Matz, and Lara Drino together have formed partnerships with a number of the places like the Stewart House and Journey Out and CAST. I mean, sort of the organizations that help the trafficked young kids and abused young children. And they have developed a specialty in how you deal with a child victim and how you try a case against a perpetrator. And you might say that kind of child sex abuse should never be a misdemeanor. What is it doing in your office? There's a difference in policy between the current district attorney and my office. The current district attorney will not prosecute without testimony from a victim. And when you're dealing with DV cases and you're dealing with child sex abuse cases, they're often hesitant to take the stand on direct. Still have to present them for cross. Okay, there's no way to convict somebody
Sure.
without presenting someone whose video evidence you introduce for cross. But the fact is, most defense lawyers are not going to cross a child. They're just not. It doesn't play well to a jury. And so my prosecutors are the ones who gave me the idea, because before I took office, they were literally stacking and asking for the maximum and running the sentences consecutively. And I think during my tenure, the longest sentence we've gotten is 11 years.
Oh, wow.
But we've gotten a couple of cases where we've put people back. These are bad people, okay? These are child abusers, pedophiles. We just had one where I think the child is 5 years old, and we're stacking because if the DA doesn't prosecute, we have to. And the only way we can think of to handle it is really to put them away to get as much as we can.
It's very sad, but I'm very happy in the sense that you're doing something about it. And obviously this is tragic on so many levels about what happens to these kids. And thank you. I mean, really, like as a human being and as a citizen, thank you. I
Thank
mean,
you for saying
you're
that.
you're making LA a better place.
Well, it's pretty funny because one of the briefs I recently edited had a line in it that said, this unfortunate tragedy can be avoided by whatever. And I looked at it and it was a brief about money. Okay, that's what we were fighting about. I took out the sentence and I said, I'm sorry, since I took this job, anything that threatens life and limb is tragic. Okay, fighting about money is not tragic. It's the way we resolve things under the rule of law.
So Heidi, I'm going to tease you.
Different perspective.
No, I totally get it, and that makes sense. I'm going to do a little bit of levity here and say, I wonder if I should call people in your office and say, hey, send me some Heidi red lines. Is it a sea of red ink when she rewrites your brief, or does she use a light touch?
It's called work product privilege, and if anybody in my released it to
I mean,
you, I
technically
would
that's
chop
accurate.
their red pen in half. No,
That's accurate. Okay. All right.
yeah,
So let's talk a little bit about cannabis for a second.
yep.
Okay. So I think a lot of people who actually have gone through the license process and been approved by the DCR and are in compliance, they're seeing many things that have hurt their business. One, you may know that because it's, quote, in a legal business under 280E of the Internal Revenue Code, they can't deduct business expenses like regular businesses are. So it becomes very hard to sustain these businesses. And then all the way, and I know there probably isn't a lot of growing here, but from the Golden Triangle up north throughout the state and people who are doing illegal deliveries, it's making it very hard for cannabis business owners with licenses to compete with people who don't comply. So I'm sure this is coming up to your office, and what's going on at the city attorney with that?
I have, well, let me back up. There's a limit to what I can say, because to the extent that we have active investigations, that's not
Sure,
what I can talk about.
sure.
Um, I have different parts of my office that touch the cannabis industry. And one of the things I've been trying to sort through is there a better way to organize us? But this is how it's currently organized. There is a group within my municipal branch that both provides general counsel advice to the Department of Cannabis Regulation and brings enforcement actions against licensed holders who are not meeting the conditions of their permit. Okay, so if you have a license or a permit, you're in my municipal branch, and the oversight and the enforcement and the assistance is all municipal civil. I also have a unit within my criminal branch called regulatory prosecution. And one of the assistant supervisors there, and they do have a grant to continue to operate to enforce. But actually, I'm not sure if the grant's on the regulatory side or the criminal side, so I should be careful. But there is a group within my criminal regulatory prosecution who deals with folks who are not licensed at all. As we have been focused more on regulatory prosecution and enforcement, one of the things that we found in the municipal code is that my office is not a law enforcement agency for purposes of investigation
Mm,
and initiation of actions.
mhm.
We are passive. So we sit and receive referrals from the Department of Cannabis Regulation, from the Los Angeles Police Department, which, as we know, is woefully understaffed. Okay, and I don't mean to disparage the severity of this issue. What I am saying is that the sworn peace officers who are keeping all of us safe really don't have much excess bandwidth to go look at an unlicensed storefront cannabis facility, and their tools to deal with the unlicensed facilities are limited. Because at the end of the day, what can you do? Arrest the 18-year-old behind the counter? That's not an effective way, again, to shut it down. So between the criminal regulatory prosecution side and my public rights side, we are taking a look at what can we do with respect to the storefront itself, to the property owner who knowingly has leased to an unlicensed facility. And stay tuned. I, again, with Mayor Bass, visited a beautiful licensed facility, I want to say down on Crenshaw Boulevard,
Mhm.
on MLK Day. We went down there.
Okay.
There is a licensed facility around the corner from me that I think is well lit and safe and conducts its business, in accordance with the law, and is a great source of revenue for us the way it's supposed to be. And so now that I'm kind of done with the internal reorg, as I turn outward focused, I do think, given the blood, sweat, and tears that the city has put into making a cannabis industry option work, it's incumbent on my office to start shutting down the unlicensed facilities and helping to make it all work.
Now that's really great. I want to tell you as an aside, I don't know if you had a chance to see my podcast with my colleague Paul Rohr, and we were talking about real estate development and how the city has to be able to support itself, and how more businesses create more city taxes. And when you have state laws that basically allow the state to make decisions that adversely affect you, I mean, you're in a position where you got to do what's in the best interest for the city. And obviously, there's no apologies for saying, hey, if we are legitimately entitled to city taxes and city revenue, we should have it. In addition to issues of public safety and other ancillary things that happen when people have unlawful businesses. I mean, it's the right thing to do. And nobody should be ashamed that you're doing this.
I'm not the slightest bit ashamed of that. I mean, it's the same thing with short-term rentals, okay? The problem with the unlicensed short-term rental industry is we're not collecting our transient occupancy tax, among other things. And yes, I mean, I brought a big lawsuit against Nightfall Group to try to shut down that web hosting platform for party houses. We are trying to deal with, again, the properties that are being leased out in violation of the law. It doesn't help our housing crisis. It doesn't help our revenue base. And it doesn't help our hotel and hospitality industry that is operating within legitimate parameters to have all of these vacant event homes, party homes, short-term rentals around the city. And so that's a priority.
And it makes sense. And again, it's multiple level. It's not just a revenue thing. It is public safety. There's issues of traffic and noise and what happens at these parties, whether people are, overdose on drugs. I mean, it's real. It's a real challenge. And it's good that you're doing that.
Thank you.
So, no, I mean, Heidi,
Thank you.
you get stuff done. That could be a campaign sticker. We get S done.
I do my best to do that.
No,
Okay.
I understand. Thanks for tuning in. If you want more info on the show, please visit blockandtackleshow.com. And you can also email me at carl@blockandtackleshow.com. Thanks for tuning in.